At our graduation, everyone clapped when my sister's name was called. But when mine was announced, the room fell silent, right before exploding into a standing ovation. My parents didn't see it coming, but I had been planning this moment for 4 years. If you've ever been overlooked, betrayed, or told you weren't worth the effort, this story will show you how to turn pain into power. My name is Claire Morgan, and by the time I was 8, I had already learned that love in our house came with conditions. From the outside, the Morgans looked like the embodiment of suburban contentment: two working parents, a two-story colonial with a manicured lawn, and two daughters with matching school uniforms and photo albums full of staged smiles. But behind the white picket fence, there was a quiet imbalance that would shape every step of my life. My parents, David and Linda, were the kind of people who believed in potential, but only when it came in the package they expected. That package was my younger sister, Sophie. She had golden curls that always stayed neat, a charming giggle, and an innate sense of knowing when to say what people wanted to hear. Sophie was the star of our family's universe. Her every talent was celebrated with pride. Dance recitals were recorded from 3 different angles, school awards displayed like trophies on the mantle, her stories told and retold at every family gathering. I watched it all from the corners, rarely invited into the spotlight, but always told to applaud politely. At Christmas, Sophie would unwrap tech gadgets and designer jackets, while I received dollar store art supplies or winter socks. "Claire's the practical one," my mom would say with a chuckle, as if that made the inequity logical. When I asked why Sophie got more, Mom would simply smile and pat my hand. "Your sister's gifts are an investment. Dance lessons might really take her somewhere." I knew better than to push further. It wasn't just holidays. At Sophie's spelling bee, both of our parents took the day off work. When I had a painting selected for the district-wide art show, Mom dropped by on her lunch break, checked her watch every 5 minutes, and left before my name was called. "Art's nice, Claire," she said vaguely. "But remember, it's just a hobby. Focus on something useful, like math." I didn't have the charm or polish of my sister, but I had something else: quiet resilience and curiosity. I liked to build things from scratch. Miniature cities with cardboard and glue, pretend businesses with price tags, and pretend customers. I wasn't interested in attention. I wanted to understand how things worked. But in my family, what I liked wasn't taken seriously. There was one exception: my grandmother, Evelyn. My mother's mother. She lived in a weathered lake cabin 3 hours away and had a laugh like the wind, soft but ever-present. Every summer, I spent 2 weeks with her, away from the weight of comparison, and in her eyes, I wasn't the other daughter. I was just Claire.
She saw me.
While Sophie had her ballet camps and playdates, I had Grandma Evelyn's porch, her homemade lemonade, and an endless supply of notebooks and markers she'd pick up from yard sales. "You've got the mind of a builder," she told me once as I showed her my paper model of a cafe, complete with menus and a register made from an old tissue box. "Not everyone sees the world the way you do. That's your magic, Claire. Don't let anyone steal that." It was in her little lakeside library, filled with biographies and business books, that I first read about people who built their own paths: inventors, entrepreneurs, women who started with nothing and refused to let the world define them. I was too young to fully understand their strategies, but I understood their fire, and I knew I had some of it inside me. At night, lying on the creaky guest bed listening to the lake water tap against the shore, I made quiet promises to myself that I would grow up and make something out of nothing, that I would become someone who couldn't be ignored. But when I returned home each summer, reality always greeted me at the front door. My achievements were rarely acknowledged beyond polite nods. When I won a local science fair in 6th grade with a project on recycled energy, my mom barely looked up from her emails. "That's nice," she said. "But don't forget to help Sophie with her presentation. Her debate team competition is this weekend." My father was no better. "We just want what's best for both of you," he'd say if I ever brought up the difference in treatment. But best always seemed to mean best for Sophie. Still, I tried to earn their attention. I studied hard, got top marks, and stayed out of trouble. But it was never enough. Even as I began building my own tiny ventures, babysitting flyers, garage sales, handmade bookmarks for classmates, my efforts were dismissed as just Claire keeping busy. No one ever asked what my dreams were, but Evelyn always did. "Don't let them define your worth, Claire," she would whisper during our long walks by the lake. "You're not invisible. They just don't know how to see yet." I didn't fully grasp the weight of her words then, but I would. Over time, I would learn that being unseen can become your greatest strength because it gives you space to shape yourself without interference. This is the story of how I used that space, of how I turned silence into strategy, neglect into fire, and how, one day, standing in a cap and gown beside the sister who had always been chosen, I gave them a reason to look, really look for the first time, and they didn't like what they saw. The family dinner that changed everything wasn't remarkable in any outward way. The table was set. The roast was perfectly seasoned, and laughter filled the air, at least at first. But I had no idea that a few words, said over mashed potatoes, would redefine what family meant to me. After Lily and I were both accepted into prestigious programs at the same university, she in political science, me in business, I dared to believe things might finally shift. Maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally see me. They might even be proud. When I opened my acceptance letter to Elmridge University, I cried. Not because I doubted my ability, but because I thought they might finally recognize it. They didn't. At dinner, my dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk about college finances," he said, his eyes fixed on Lily. My heart started to pound, but I stayed quiet, hopeful. "Lily, we've saved for this since you were a baby," he continued. "Elmridge is expensive, but you won't need to worry. We'll cover everything." Lily smiled, and our mom reached across the table to squeeze her hand. I waited for them to turn to me. They didn't. The silence stretched so long it became unbearable. I finally asked, "What about me?" The pause that followed was longer than it should have been. My father set down his fork. My mother's smile faded. "Emma," she said softly, "we've always admired your independence. You're resourceful. You've worked jobs, found scholarships. We believe you can handle this." I blinked, unable to process it. "So, you're not paying for my tuition?" "We can't afford both," Dad said. "And we feel Lily has clear long-term potential. Political science leads to law, government stable careers. Business? It's risky. Besides, you've always preferred figuring things out on your own." I stared at them, stunned. My GPA was higher than Lily's. I had worked 20 hours a week while maintaining top grades. I had won a regional business competition. None of that mattered. The words that broke me came next. "She deserves it," Dad added, as if explaining something obvious. "You don't." I stopped breathing. "You don't mean that," I said. "You can't." But their expression said otherwise. My mother even added, "Sweetheart, you've always been more creative. More of a free spirit. That's not a bad thing." My throat closed up. "You're telling me that after everything I've done, you won't invest in me?" "We're trying to make the best decision," Dad said. "You'll be fine." But I wasn't. I wasn't fine. That night, I locked myself in my room and cried harder than I had since I was a child. I cried for every spelling bee they skipped, every art show they forgot. Every moment I convinced myself it wasn't favoritism, just oversight. I cried for the little girl who had tried so hard to be seen. They had never really seen me. Not once. It wasn't about money. It was about value. About who they believed was worth betting on. And in their eyes, that wasn't me. When the tears stopped, something colder took their place. A kind of clarity. If they wouldn't invest in me, I would invest in myself. If they couldn't see my worth, I would prove it so loudly the world would have no choice. But first, I needed someone who believed in me. I called my grandmother, Eleanor. She answered on the first ring. "Emma, sweetheart?" I need to get away," I whispered. "Come," she said immediately. "Come tomorrow. Stay as long as you need." When I arrived at her lake house, She wrapped me in her arms and didn't ask questions. We sat on the porch that night, wrapped in blankets, and I told her everything. Every word. Every silence. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said the words that would anchor me for years to come. "They are wrong, Emma. But you are right to feel this pain. It's not weakness. It's truth. And truth will guide you further than approval ever will." I sobbed in her arms. The next morning, over oatmeal and strawberries, I made a decision. I would go to Elmridge. I would find the money. I would work myself raw, if I had to. But I would go. And I would not just survive, I would shine. Not for them. For me. Determination is a beautiful word, until it becomes your only option. Returning from my grandmother's sanctuary, I didn't walk through the front door of my parents' house the same girl who had left. I was quieter. Sharper. The world had narrowed into a series of objectives. Find a way to afford college, survive, and win, not just academically, but spiritually. I began that Monday morning at 7 a.m. with a legal pad, 3 highlighters, and every scholarship website I could find. I spent my school lunches filling out applications, my evenings writing essays, and my weekends calling organizations for any opportunity, no matter how small. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Chun, noticed the shift. After I showed up outside her office 3 afternoons in a row, she invited me in and shut the door behind us. "Emma, you're carrying something heavy," she said. "I just need help finding money," I replied, trying to sound practical, not desperate. She didn't push. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. "We'll do this together." For the next 2 months, Mrs. Chen became my co-pilot. She edited essays, made phone calls, and even personally drove me to a weekend financial aid workshop across town. It was at that workshop where I learned that I didn't need a full ride. I just needed enough pieces, grants, work-study, loans, to stitch together a lifeboat. And stitch I did. I won 3 small scholarships, totaling $3,200. My grandmother co-signed a modest private loan. The rest I covered with federal loans and an offer to work in the campus cafeteria through work-study. Still, tuition was only half the battle. Housing was another beast. Lily, of course, had a fully decorated dorm waiting for her, courtesy of our parents, and a Pinterest board. I couldn't afford campus housing. So, I found a Craigslist ad. Shared apartment. Small room. $275 per month. Must like cats. The room was in a crumbling Victorian house with peeling paint and questionable plumbing. My room was more of a converted closet with a twin bed and a milk crate for a nightstand. But it was mine. And it was close enough to Elmridge to walk. I bought my textbooks used, borrowed others from the library, and downloaded PDFs where I could. I found a job at a local coffee shop that promised early morning shifts before class and weekend hours. The pay was minimum wage, but the manager, Jasmine, had kind eyes and offered free muffins after closing. I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. My days were crammed with lectures, study groups, work, more work, then homework until 2 a.m. I drank dollar coffee and learned to survive on 3 hours of sleep and secondhand hope. But despite everything, something unexpected bloomed. Pride. Not the kind that comes from recognition or trophies, but the quiet, grounded pride of knowing that each small step, every dollar earned, every grade earned, was mine. Fully mine. Still, some nights were hard. Like the night I saw Lily's Instagram story, her dorm strung with fairy lights, her caption gushing about the best parents ever. Or the day my car, my 10-year-old hand-me-down Honda, died halfway to class in the snow. I walked the remaining 3 miles, soaked to the skin, and took my midterm shivering. I didn't tell anyone. Until Zoe. Zoe was my roommate, or rather, the girl who rented the large room across the hall in the apartment. She was loud, funny, and messy in a charming way. At first, I avoided her. I didn't have time for friendship. But Zoe didn't ask permission. She knocked on my door one night holding a plate of pasta and said, "I made too much. And you look like you haven't eaten since last Thursday." That pasta turned into a friendship. Slowly, I let her in. She learned my schedule and left snacks in the fridge labeled, "Eat me, or I'll cry." She edited my essays, shoved blankets over me when I passed out mid-homework, and cheered when I made it through my first month without missing a rent payment. One night, when I came home from a double shift, soaked and defeated, she sat me down. "Emma, this is not normal," she said gently. "What you're doing, it's extraordinary. But you can't do it alone forever." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She poured me tea, and I cried. That night marked the beginning of something I never expected, my chosen family. In the months that followed, I found pockets of kindness in unexpected places. Jasmine at the cafe let me study behind the counter when it was slow. Professor Lopez, who taught Intro to Business, called me the most resourceful student I've seen in 10 years after reading my project on budgeting software for low-income households. Even MS Winters in the financial aid office once slipped me a campus food voucher by accident. These people, strangers, really became my scaffolding. Meanwhile, my parents didn't call. Not once. But I was beginning to learn something powerful. You don't need those who break you to rebuild you. And sometimes, the most beautiful things in life are built entirely from scratch. It was early spring when I realized I had crossed a line, not into comfort but into competence. The kind of competence forged by hardship, not handed down with praise and promises. The business ethics class changed everything. Professor Bennett was sharp, intense, and allergic to mediocrity. Her lectures weren't just about frameworks and case studies. They were about character, about the decisions we make when no one's watching. One morning, she assigned us a simulation, run a theoretical business under pressure. Most students treated it like a game. I treated it like life. I stayed up until dawn mapping out supply chains, marketing tactics, and contingency plans. When I presented, she didn't interrupt once. "Miss Carter," she said, using my last name like a badge, "your resilience model is the most robust I've seen." I blinked. She continued, "How did you learn to think like this?" I shrugged. "I've lived it." She smiled slowly. "Then keep living it. You belong in this world." That class was the matchstick. The fire caught fast. I applied for an undergrad research assistantship in the business department and got it. Professor Bennett brought me onto her project studying the adaptability of small businesses during economic downturns. I read reports, interviewed business owners, and learned how real entrepreneurs turn scarcity into strategy. And I saw myself in every line of their stories. At night, I began crafting my own venture. A digital support agency for small, rural businesses, social media scheduling, virtual bookkeeping, customer outreach. I wasn't trying to change the world. I just wanted to survive. By junior year, that scrappy idea had turned into a working business. I named it AnchorPath. I started with 2 clients, a hardware store and a florist, who paid me in Venmo and sometimes store credit. I reinvested everything. A basic website, a logo designed by a classmate, and eventually 2 interns, both women from my entrepreneurship class who needed experience more than money. Zoe became our unofficial 3rd co-founder, brainstorming names and beta testing workflows. Every evening turned into a debrief session over microwaved burritos. Meanwhile, my course load didn't lighten. I took every finance, management, and marketing elective I could. I devoured them, hungry to understand how businesses lived or died. My GPA held steady at 4.0. I stopped waiting for my parents to notice. They didn't. They called Lily weekly. I got a birthday text. 1 line. No puntuación. But I was no longer starved for their attention. I was building something louder. Then came the invitation, the National Collegiate Business Innovation Competition. Professor Bennett slid a brochure across her desk with a knowing look. "You have something the others don't," she said. "You've already built what they're still planning." I hesitated. "Do you think it's good enough?" "Emma," she said, "you're not just good enough. You're the benchmark." That night, I walked home humming. For weeks, I rehearsed my pitch in front of mirrors, friends, and anyone who'd listen. I refined my financials, mapped my growth strategy, and sharpened my delivery. The pitch was about Anchorpath, but also about every girl who had ever been underestimated. The first round went by in a blur. Then the second. By the final round, I was one of 5 left standing. The panel of judges was silent as I presented. When I finished, a woman from a major consulting firm leaned forward. "Who taught you to structure growth under constraint like this?" I smiled. Life did. 2 weeks later, I received the call. I had won. A $50,000 grant. Mentorship. National exposure. I didn't tell my parents. Instead, I told Zoe, who screamed and danced around our kitchen with a ladle. I told Professor Bennett, who nodded solemnly and said, "Don't let it scare you. Let it lift you." I told Grandma, who cried and said, "That's my diamond." And I told Lily. Our relationship had remained polite but distant. She was still the golden child, still living her curated college life with spring formals and summer internships. But something in her had softened. When I called to tell her about the win, she didn't deflect or joke. "Emma," she said, "I'm so proud of you." And for the first time, I believed she meant it. That semester, something shifted in me. I no longer felt like I was playing catch-up. I was leading, speaking up in lectures, mentoring younger students, hiring help for Anchorpath, being seen not as the girl with the sad backstory, but as a founder. I even started sleeping 6 hours a night. Sometimes. The more success I earned, the more I wanted to reach back. I started a free workshop series on campus. Build smart, start small. It wasn't much, but students showed up. People wanted to hear how to build under pressure from someone who had done it. And as I stood there, teaching others what I had clawed through to learn, I realized something. I had already started becoming the woman I once needed. Lily showed up at my apartment door the week after midterms with tear-stained cheeks and trembling fingers. She looked nothing like the golden girl who used to glide through life on compliments and certainty. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she whispered, holding out a thick binder of research notes and half-written pages. "My senior thesis is falling apart. My professor says my methodology is all wrong. I might not graduate." I stared at her, heart torn between resentment and something softer. This was the same girl who'd gotten dorm room decor shopping trips and tuition handouts while I sold coffee for rent. But this wasn't the same version of her. She wasn't smug. She was scared. I stepped aside. "Come in." That night became the first of many. We sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of books and our past. I coached her through structuring arguments, citing sources, cutting the fluff. And slowly, she opened up. "I always thought you were fine," she confessed one evening as we took a break. "You just always seemed okay. Independent. Capable." "Fine is relative," I said, trying to keep my voice even. I worked 60-hour weeks. I missed meals. I cried in bathroom stalls between classes. "You were going to Paris for debate." Her eyes filled again. "Mom and Dad made it seem like you wanted it this way." That stung more than I expected. "They made me want it that way," I said quietly, "because they didn't offer anything else." For the first time, Lily didn't deflect. She didn't try to justify them. She simply nodded. They were wrong. It wasn't redemption, but it was recognition. Over the next month, our study sessions became sister sessions. She helped clean when I didn't have time. I taught her how to budget. We swapped stories from our classes and laughed at how different our worlds had been, even within the same campus. She started pushing back on our parents, too, declining their lavish offers, opting for simpler things, mentioning my name in family chats more. Once, I overheard her on the phone with Mom. "Emma's killing it, by the way. You should ask her about the national business comp she just won." There was a pause, then a mumbled, "Oh, that's great." It wasn't a tidal wave of change, but it was the beginning of a current. Then an email came that shifted my orbit. Dean Rodriguez wanted to meet. Her office was warm, full of books and framed photos of past students. She sat me down with a smile that felt like sunlight after winter. "Emma," she said, "we'd like you to deliver the student commencement address this year." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded. You represent what we want our graduates to become. And more than that, you've built something remarkable. We want your story to be heard. I swallowed, emotion catching in my throat. They won't like it, I said, meaning my parents. She smiled again. That's okay. This speech isn't for them. It's for everyone who needs to hear it. The day I told Lily, she cried. I'm so proud of you, she said, hugging me tightly. You deserve this more than anyone. I'm nervous, I admitted. What if it's too personal? Too much? Then it's perfect, she replied. Because that's what you've always been. Too much for them. Just enough for the world. Those words stayed with me as I wrote my speech, word by word, memory by memory. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. The journey was the proof. The scars were the signatures. Meanwhile, my agency, AnchorPath, was growing faster than I could manage alone. I brought on 2 part-time coordinators, hired a part-time developer, and opened a small office downtown with the grant money. I was still tired, still overwhelmed, but I was finally building from strength, not survival. Finals came and went. Lily passed her thesis defense with flying colors. I got a surprise interview invitation from Alexander Global Consulting, a firm I'd admired since freshman year. When I stepped into their modern office for my interview, the director greeted me with a printout of my competition pitch. You're not here because you applied, she said. You're here because we've been watching your work. A week later, I received the offer. $90,000 a year. Full benefits. Relocation package. It was more than my father made. I didn't tell him. I told Grandma Eleanor, who wept over the phone. I told Lily, who screamed and hugged me. And I told Zoe, who said, I knew you were the real deal. As graduation approached, the past and future began to collide. My speech was finalized. My gown was pressed. Grandma embroidered a custom stole for me, deep blue with silver thread that read, made under pressure. Stronger for it. One night, after a late work session, Lily and I sat on the floor eating cold pizza. You changed me, she said quietly. Being near you, it made me see myself differently. I looked at her, once my shadow, now my mirror. You changed too, I said. Not everyone does. She smiled. Then maybe we're both the lucky ones. And in that quiet, I felt something shift again. Not closure, but growth. Not perfection, but peace. Graduation was coming, and I was finally ready. Graduation morning dawned bright and windless, the kind of May day that felt chosen. As though the world itself had paused in reverence. I woke before the alarm, heart fluttering with the electricity of something final and magnificent. My tiny apartment, filled with boxes and half-packed bags, seemed almost sacred in its stillness. This space had witnessed everything, my tears, my triumphs, my rebirth. I sat on the edge of my bed, running my fingers over the stole Grandma Eleanor had embroidered. Made under pressure. Stronger for it. Zoe knocked once before walking in with coffee. Toast to the boss lady, she said, handing me a latte with a heart drawn in foam. Today, you don't just walk. You fly. At campus, families bustled with excitement, snapping photos, fixing mortarboards, crying behind sunglasses. I stood in the sea of black robes and honor cords, searching. Lily found me first, her blonde hair pinned back with a quiet grace I'd never seen before. You look like a CEO, she whispered. You look like someone who made it the hard way, I replied. We didn't hug. We just smiled. Sisters, finally. The ceremony was held on the central green, the grand stage flanked by banners and flowers, speakers humming, dignitaries seated in a neat row. As names were called, applause cascaded like waves. When they called Lily's name, the crowd clapped warmly. Our parents, seated near the front, rose to their feet. She walked the stage with poise, shook hands, accepted her diploma, and smiled. A golden child's finale. Then, President Harlow returned to the podium. Before we conclude, we have a tradition of honoring a student who embodies the spirit of this university, resilience, vision, and impact. This year, That student is Emma Carter. A murmur moved through the audience. My parents turned sharply. Emma has not only excelled academically with a perfect 4.0 GPA, but founded a digital agency employing students and serving rural communities. She self-financed her education, worked multiple jobs, and won the National Collegiate Business Innovation Competition. The words washed over me, not as validation, but as liberation. He smiled. Please welcome our student commencement speaker. As I stepped onto the stage, I didn't feel nervous. I felt known. For years ago, I arrived with a borrowed suitcase and a quiet promise to myself that I would not leave the same, that I would build something no one could take away. I spoke about the quiet nights of doubt, the strength born in solitude, the makeshift meals and makeshift dreams. I didn't mention my parents by name, but the subtext hummed beneath every word. I was not the chosen one. I was the choosing one. We often believe success looks like a straight line, paved by support and certainty. But sometimes, success looks like a cracked sidewalk, walked barefoot and alone. And that journey, though painful, makes us invincible. I ended with a quote from my grandmother. Your worth is not defined by who believes in you. It is defined by who you become when no one does. The applause rose like a tide. I saw Lily standing. Grandma, too, her hands clasped tight, tears streaking her cheeks. And my parents? They clapped, hesitantly. But they clapped. Later, at the reception, Dean Rodriguez pulled me aside. You just changed how people will remember this class, she said. Also, the Dean of Admissions for the MBA program is here. They'd like to talk. I blinked. MBA? Full scholarship, she said. If you want it. Around me, professors and peers offered hugs, handshakes, congratulations. I felt none of the loneliness I once expected to accompany success. I felt surrounded. Seen. My parents approached slowly. Mom tried to smile. You were amazing. We had no idea. I know, I said simply. Dad looked like he wanted to say more but settled for congratulations. That night, at the family dinner, the tension lingered like smoke. But something had shifted. Uncle James toasted to Emma, who showed us all what real grit looks like. My parents said little, but they listened. Afterward, as I packed at my apartment, Lily joined me. She sat on my floor, cross-legged, like we had for months. What now? She asked. Now I work. Build. Rest, maybe. You? Grad school. Social work. I want to fix things. Be the person we needed. I nodded. Then maybe we both made it. She leaned her head against my shoulder. You were always the blueprint, Emma. I just didn't know how to read it. Outside, the city buzzed with summer beginnings. But inside, I felt closure. Not the end, but the turning point. The next chapter waited. And this time, I was writing it on my terms. The morning of graduation dawned golden, the sun casting a soft glow on the city skyline. I stood by the window of my modest apartment, clutching the speech I'd rehearsed a dozen times, heart pounding with the rhythm of memory. Today wasn't just about degrees or honors. It was about reclaiming every moment I had been overlooked. Zoe drove Lily, Grandma Eleanor, and me to the university in her small but clean car, music low, mood reverent. I wore the blue stole Grandma had embroidered, its silver threads catching the sunlight like armor. Lily reached over and squeezed my hand. You ready? She asked. I don't think anyone's ever really ready for something like this, I said. But I'm willing. The campus buzzed with joy, pride, and anticipation. Families gathered with balloons and banners, snapping photos by the fountain. I saw classmates hugging parents, laughter echoing like freedom. I saw Lily walking with Grandma, radiant in her own gown. And I walked beside them, an equal, a sister, a granddaughter, no longer an outsider. At the graduate staging area, Dean Rodriguez met me with a knowing smile. Everything's arranged, she whispered. Just follow the cue. My name appeared first in the printed program under Student Commencement Address. I folded the paper neatly and slid it into my sleeve. In the grand auditorium, thousands filled the seats. My parents had prime positions near the front, surrounded by relatives they'd invited for Lily. They hadn't spoken to me since the offer from Alexander Global, which I never told them about directly. But I knew the news had spread. I saw Uncle David wave. Aunt Susan nodded warmly. Even distant cousins clapped when Lily and I walked in. It felt like stepping into a spotlight I had earned. The ceremony began with the national anthem, a few speeches by university officials, and the conferring of degrees by department. When my name was called, for business school, the applause startled me. It was loud, sustained. Lily whistled from her seat. Grandma Eleanor's proud smile made everything else disappear. Then President Harmon stepped up to the mic. Before we close today's ceremony, he said, we have the honor of hearing from this year's student commencement speaker, selected for her academic excellence, community impact, and entrepreneurial spirit, Emma Carter. I walked slowly to the podium, each step echoing in my ears. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, confused, maybe stunned. They hadn't expected me to speak. They hadn't expected much at all. I took a deep breath and began. I came to Westfield with a dream and a duffel bag. No financial safety net. No family celebration. Just a promise I made to myself. To create a life they couldn't ignore. Gasps rippled. I saw Dad shift in his seat. Mom stiffened. My first night here, I slept on a mattress on the floor of an apartment with peeling paint and strangers for roommates. I worked 30 hours a week. I skipped meals to buy books. I studied on buses, cried in bathrooms, and failed to believe I deserved to be here until I started believing in myself. I shared how I built a business from scratch, found mentors who saw my worth, and grew stronger through adversity. I didn't mention my parents by name, but I didn't have to. The truth was in the absences. We often measure success by visible milestones, degrees, titles, salaries. But I measure it by who shows up for you when you have nothing. By the people who hold your belief when you can't, and by the grit it takes to keep going when no one claps for you yet. The audience stood. Applause thundered. Back at my seat, I trembled, not from nerves, but release. Lily leaned over. You just rewrote everything, she whispered. The awards segment followed. Dean Rodriguez announced departmental honors. When she reached the School of Business, she smiled directly at me. This year's Entrepreneurial Excellence Award goes to Emma Carter, whose digital agency has served over 30 small businesses across the state and who graduates with a 4.0 GPA. My parents' faces froze. And, she added, Emma is the recipient of the National Collegiate Business Innovation Prize, earning $50,000 in funding for her company and bringing national attention to Westfield University. Whispers swirled. Phones came out. News spread like wildfire. Dean Rodriguez wasn't done. Inspired by her journey, the university has established the Carter Resilience Scholarship, supporting students who face systemic barriers in pursuit of higher education. I felt Lily's hand in mine again. When the ceremony ended, my parents hovered nearby, flanked by uncles and cousins who now looked at me with new eyes. Dad finally stepped forward. You could have told us, he said. It sounded more like a complaint than concern. I didn't think you'd listen, I replied. Mom's voice was softer. We're proud of you. I nodded. Thank you. But I didn't offer more. Because pride, offered too late, feels hollow. Grandma Eleanor joined us and wrapped her arm around my shoulder. She didn't need your belief to become extraordinary. But she needed you to know she did it anyway. Silence. Then Lily stepped between us, facing our parents. You missed it, she said gently. But maybe you'll get a second chance. Maybe. We walked away as a trio, me, my sister, and my grandmother. Past the ivy walls and proud banners. Past the people who used to doubt. Into the world I'd built from the dust of disregard. I didn't just graduate that day. I arrived. That evening. After the applause faded and the mortarboard settled, we drove to the rented house where my parents had planned a family dinner. It was the kind of suburban palace they used to dream about. Vaulted ceilings, pristine countertops, rented decor that screamed status. Walking in with Grandma Eleanor and Lily at my side, the room went silent. Then, as if on cue, relatives swarmed. Hugs, handshakes, congratulations flowed freely. For the first time, I wasn't just Lily's older sister or the quiet girl they rarely saw. I was someone. They had seen the magazine feature. They had heard the speech. They knew. Mom emerged from the kitchen, her smile polite, brittle around the edges. "Emma, you came. We were just setting the table." Dad clapped me on the back. "There's our star," he said too loudly, as if volume could rewrite history. "Why didn't you ever tell us about that business job?" "Maybe because you never asked," I said evenly. Before he could respond, Uncle Jack, always the blunt one, chuckled. "Robert, I don't remember you mentioning Emma's agency or her awards at Christmas dinner. Quite the oversight." The air tensed. My parents exchanged a glance. Mom tried to recover. "We didn't want to make a fuss until things were official." "They were official last fall," Lily said, crossing her arms. "Emma's been running a business while earning a perfect GPA. She's been official longer than you know." My father flushed. Aunt Susan chimed in from the corner. "Emma, what's the name of your agency again? I think our office could use some marketing help." The conversation shifted. People asked about my work, my plans, my future. I answered confidently, if cautiously. I wasn't there to punish. I was there to be seen. Dinner was served buffet style. We gathered around the long dining table, passing dishes and politeness. It was the first time in years I felt the weight of their gaze turn from skeptical to impressed. But part of me remained detached, watching it unfold like a play I no longer auditioned for. As dessert was served, my father cleared his throat. "Your mother and I were talking, Emma. We'd like to help with the security deposit on your new place. Consider it a graduation gift." I looked at him, wondering if he meant it, if it came from guilt or genuine change. "Thank you," I said slowly, "but it won't be necessary. My signing bonus from Alexander Global covered that. And then some." He blinked. "They gave you a signing bonus?" $10,000. Plus full benefits. Mom's fork clinked against her plate. Dad leaned back, silent. For once, they couldn't measure me against Lily. I had outpaced their expectations, and it showed. After dinner, the crowd thinned. Some relatives left with hugs and new respect. A few whispered apologies, the kind people give when they realize they picked the wrong horse to bet on. Eventually, it was just us, my parents, Lily, Grandma Eleanor, and me. We sat in the living room, awkward as teenagers at a chaperoned dance. "We made mistakes," Mom said finally. "We favored Lily. We thought we were doing what was best." "You didn't just favor her," I said. "You invested in her future and left me to survive mine." Dad exhaled sharply. "We didn't know how strong you were." "That's not a compliment," I replied. "It's an excuse." Grandma Eleanor, calm as ever, sipped her tea. "You missed who she was because you couldn't imagine her being more than what you expected." Lily reached for my hand. "They're trying. In their way. Maybe that's all they have right now." I didn't nod. I didn't forgive. Not yet. But I stayed. I listened. Later, as we packed up to leave, Mom offered me leftovers. "In case you're too busy to cook." I took them. Not out of need, but because sometimes peace looks like pie in a plastic container. In the car, Grandma leaned her head against the window. "You know, a lot of people never get a moment like today. Not even once in a lifetime." It was more than I expected, I admitted. "No," she said, turning to me. "It was exactly what you earned." And for the first time in years, I believed it too. The days following graduation settled like gentle waves after a storm, calm, yet charged with the energy of change. I moved into a sleek but modest apartment near Alexander Global's downtown office. The walls were bare at first, the fridge half empty, but it was mine. Paid for not by a parent's wallet, but by years of grit, by a scholarship won on merit, by a contract negotiated with confidence. I hung a photo of Grandma Eleanor and me on the wall across from my desk. It reminded me who held me up when no one else did. The office plant she gifted me sat on the windowsill, its leaves stretching toward the light like I had. Lily visited a week later, bringing a thrift store vase and fresh daisies. For brightness, she said. She didn't stay long. Her own job at a nonprofit was just starting, but we sat on my floor eating takeout, laughing like the sisters we hadn't had the chance to be. You think you'll ever fully forgive them? She asked quietly. It was a question I had started asking myself, too. Not just about my parents, but about the silence I endured, the dinners I ate alone, the applause I never got until I stopped needing it. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a finish line. It was a threshold. And I wasn't sure I was ready to step through. A few Sundays later, my parents invited me to lunch, neutral ground, public setting. We sat at a corner table in a quiet cafe, the clink of silverware filling the silences. We wanted to talk, Dad began. He looked different. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe I was just bigger now. Mom pushed a small envelope toward me. Inside was a handwritten note and a check. Just a small token, she said. For the business. We know it's not much compared to what you've built. The amount was modest, but the gesture felt real. It wasn't a buyout. It was a seed. We've been reading about you, she added. You're not just successful. You're respected. Admired. We had no idea. That was the problem, I said. You never tried to find out. They nodded. This time, without defense. We thought Lily needed us more, Dad said. We thought you were okay. I was okay, I said. But I could have been so much more with even a little of what you gave her. They didn't argue, and that mattered. The conversation ended not with tears or hugs, but with quiet understanding. It was a start, maybe the first real one we'd ever had. That summer, I threw myself into work. Alexander Global became more than a job, it was validation. My ideas were heard in meetings. My insights shaped strategy decks. And when clients asked where I learned to think like this, I said, adversity is a powerful teacher. Meanwhile, my digital agency continued to thrive under the management of my small but mighty team of student hires. We launched a mentorship program for first-gen college students, offering workshops on building a brand, managing finances, finding your voice. We called it Project Ladder, because some of us have to build the one we climb. In late August, Westfield University invited me back to speak to the incoming class. I stood again on that same auditorium stage, this time in jeans and a blazer, no cap or gown. And I spoke about failure, about family, about forging your path when the world hands you a map meant for someone else. Afterward, a girl named Mia approached me. My parents wanted my brother to go to college. Not me, she said. But I'm here. I want to build something too. I gave her my card. Call me. We'll help you build it. Later that night, I drove to the lake house. Grandma Eleanor was on the porch, her silver hair glowing in the dusk. You look taller, she said as I sat beside her. Maybe I finally stood up straight. I smiled. We sat in silence. Then she handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate bracelet. My grandmother gave it to me when I finished school. She said, "This is to remind you. Your worth is yours. Don't let anyone name it for you." I kept it for the granddaughter who would need it most. My throat tightened. You always knew. I saw you, she said simply. Even when they didn't. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't require forgetting. It required seeing clearly, acknowledging pain without being owned by it, and allowing others to grow if they were willing to. That summer ended not with a grand gesture, but with small moments, texts from my mom asking about my next client meeting, Dad forwarding an article he thought I'd like, Lily planning a sister's weekend. None of it erased what happened. But maybe, slowly, we were writing something new. And this time, I was holding the pen. 1 year after graduation, I found myself back at Westfield University, not as a student, but as a sponsor. The auditorium buzzed with the excitement of incoming freshmen, families clutching brochures, volunteers guiding students toward a future they were only beginning to imagine. But this time, the future included something I had left behind, a gift. The Emma Walters Resilience Scholarship had awarded its first recipient, a young woman named Alina, with eyes full of fire and a story full of shadows. Her parents had left when she was 12. She raised her younger brother while working nights and graduating top of her class. When she stepped on stage to accept the award, her hand shook, but her voice rang clear. Thank you for believing in people like me. People who fight to matter. After the ceremony, I approached her. You don't have to do it all alone. That's what this is for. It's not charity. It's recognition. She nodded, eyes wet. I didn't know people like you existed. Neither did I said. Until I became one. I left campus with a full heart and a deeper conviction. My success wasn't just mine to hold, it was mine to share. That fall, Project Ladder expanded into a statewide initiative. We partnered with local colleges, offering a network of workshops, mentorships, and microgrants for first-generation students. The team grew, the vision expanded, and our impact deepened. But amid the growth, I made sure we never lost the core. The story behind the ladder. At work, Alexander Global promoted me to strategy lead within 18 months. The offer came with congratulations from the executive team and a raise that, once upon a time, I would have thought belonged to someone else's world. I had crossed the line from struggling to stable, from overlooked to respected. Yet I never stopped feeling like the girl who once folded clothes at dawn before classes. Back home, things changed too. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. My parents began to show up, not in grand apologies, but in presence. My mother started asking real questions about my work. My father asked for help understanding digital trends in his accounting practice. They sent articles, asked for advice, showed interest. And one evening, as we sat on the porch of the lake house, my mother said something that stayed with me. You taught us a new way to be parents. We didn't know how much we didn't know. Forgiveness lived in those moments, not as a lightning bolt, but as a slow sunrise. Grandma Eleanor remained my compass. We spoke weekly, and every call ended with the same sign-off. Shine bright, my girl. When she passed the next winter, I found the note she left with her will. It read, Emma, my diamond under pressure. Keep building what they tried to bury. I'll be watching. Grief hit like thunder, sudden and rolling. But her voice stayed with me. In strategy meetings, in scholarship interviews, in quiet nights alone when imposter syndrome whispered louder than success. 1 year later, I stood on the same graduation stage, addressing a new class of dreamers. I wore her bracelet. I wore my own name with pride. You may not come from privilege, I told them, but you come from power, from grit, from vision forged in fire. Don't wait for someone to open a door for you. Build your own damn house. Then hold the door open behind you. After the ceremony, as I walked off stage, I saw Lily waiting with her nonprofit team. She was thriving, no longer in my shadow, but side by side in the sunlight. We hugged for a long time. Grandma would be proud, she whispered. She always was, I said. The story wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming, rebuilding, reimagining what family, success, and legacy could mean. As I left the auditorium, a freshman called out, Emma, how do you stay so strong? I paused. Then I smiled, by remembering who I am, and who I refuse to be again. Because, in the end, I wasn't just the girl they underestimated. I was the woman they could never unsee. And I was just getting started.